it's Michael Dermer with you again, and we're going to be talking about building an operating plan. You know, everybody talks about their ideas and their concepts, but how do you actually get to operationalize those concepts? So let's get to it. So what is an operating plan and why do you need it? I mean, why don't you just wing it, right? Think about when we're an entrepreneur, we have an idea, it's new, it's unique. Why don't we just kind of figure it out as we go along? Well, anybody who really understands what it's like to deliver on an idea realizes that you have to have a plan, okay? And there's different types of pieces of your plan. You know, your strategy, your financial part, but then there's how do you actually go about operationalizing it, and why is that so important, okay? So let's get into it a little bit. So first is it actually guides your growth, right? If you don't really have a plan for the different types of products or services you're going to offer, you might end up offering something completely different than you wanted to. You know, this happens a lot in software businesses. In software businesses, you say, okay, I'm going to develop a piece of software, and you go out into the marketplace. And a customer says, well, I kind of like that, but I want it a little bit differently. Imagine if you went into a car dealership, and customers could just go in and say, you know what, I want a car with 3 tires, right? So what an operating plan is first is it really goes and helps you guide your growth, right? Next, and probably most importantly, is it sets your priorities. Right? If you don't boil things down into actually how you're going to operate, you can't set priorities for your organization. Imagine if you're rolling out a technology product, right? If you don't prioritize the rollout of that particular product as part of your operating plan, chances are you'll get lost in the day-to-day and never deliver on time. So it really does help you set your priorities, right? It also helps you assign responsibilities. Remember, as entrepreneurs, sometimes we have no resources. Sometimes all we have is a student that's willing to help us from the school we went to, or an advisor that'll give us a couple of hours. If we don't create an operating plan about the specific things we need to do, it's really hard to assign responsibilities to the scarce resources we have, okay? Next is we have to track progress, right? If you have a plan, right, that you're gonna roll out your technology product in 6 months, if you're not tracking progress along the way, you're going to end up, right, 5.5 months in going, oh my God, we're not anywhere close to hitting the goals in our operating plan, okay? And then finally, you have to plan for cash, right? If you don't have an operating plan that says, okay, I'm going to launch my product in 6 months, and as part of that launch, I know that I'm going to start to generate revenue from that product, that all lays into not just guiding growth, but thinking about how your cash is going to come in and out of the business. So how do you actually go about building an operating plan, okay? First is you have to think about your current year's objectives, right? What are we trying to accomplish this year? So I'll give you a couple examples. One might mean hitting our current year revenue projections, right? We want to generate $1 million in sales. That could be one of our current year operating objectives. But let's say, for example, it's to show ourselves as an innovator in the market. And that might be something we want to do in our current year, right? That's very different from just selling the product that we have. So if that's one of our objectives in the current year, then we have to set that as an objective. And as you can imagine, it might be everything from gaining 10% market share, right, to launching new products and services. But you have to, first and foremost in your operating plan, set your current year's objectives, right? Next is, what are your key initiatives and priorities that line up to those current year objectives? So let's go back to my example of showing the market that we're an innovator, okay? That might mean we're going to release 2 betas of our product throughout the year. And those are key initiatives that align to that current year objective of being innovative, right? So what would we do? We'd set that as an initiative, we'd set a priority to that, and we'd really think about how do we go about executing that, okay? Next is, how do you actually create metrics and accountability? So use my example again. We're going to launch 2 new betas of our product. Well, let's create metrics and accountability. Number one is, who's going to own it? Right? Who's going to own the delivery of beta number 1? Right? Number 2 is, how do we know that we're doing okay along the way? Right? Is it that we've got a release of a certain number of lines of code each week? Right? And those lines of code have a certain level of error rates that we're comfortable with, right? How do we boil that down into the specific metrics that show us that we're making a progress along the way? And then what goes with that is accountability. If you have somebody that owns this, right, how do they stay aligned given that we have metrics that we're measuring every single week? Finally is assigning financial resources, right? So we've picked a priority, we've said what we're going to do, we have an owner for it. Granted, that owner sometimes is always you, right? Because it's only you. But then we say, okay, what money or resources are we going to dedicate to that, right? So if we say, hey, listen, we're going to launch these 2 beta products, right? But we don't give anybody money and we don't give anybody any technology developers, right? Or we don't figure out a way to do this, it doesn't matter what our priorities are because we're not going to achieve them, okay? So we have to make sure that we're aligning our financial resources to it. Okay, so now think about how all this comes together, right? You've built your current year objectives. You say, okay, what are my key priorities that are going to align to those objectives? You've now assigned owners. You've developed the metrics that tell us how we're doing. And we've assigned whatever financial or other resources, right, that are going to be assigned to give us a chance of hitting that. So here's one thing you should do. Boil all of that into a 1-pager, okay? Because you can have reams and reams and reams on all those different pieces. What you want to be able to do is to be able to clearly show, what is our operating plan? Our operating plan are those things all tied together. And when you can just hand that to an employee or an investor or an advisor and say, here's what we're really focused on doing, it gives you a much greater chance of success. Okay? So obviously you've got this video, but in addition to this video, we've written out about a whole bunch of detail about operating plans side by side in this lesson that you can refer to at any time.